Ladies and gentlemen, we have what I would call a good problem. We have a great panel here, which we want to hear more from, but we also have a very distinguished visitor here, a speaker, who's on a very strict time limit, so we want to bring her to the podium and have her make her presentation. Once that's over and questions are answered, we will resume the panel. So to introduce our next speaker, I'd like to bring to the podium Midshipman Margot Dara, who is the brigade commander at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis. Margot?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So it is my honor this morning to introduce to you all the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Michelle Howard. Admiral Michelle Howard is the 38th Vice Chief of Naval Operations, is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, and is the first woman in the history of the United States Navy to have achieved the rank of 4-star Admiral. So please join me in welcoming Admiral Howard.
So I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you today a little bit about leadership and to give you my perspective. And my perspective is informed not just by my experiences, but by the heritage, some of which you just heard about right now. Edith Wharton was a novelist, well known in the 19th and 20th century. Pulitzer Prize winner, and she had this expression that leadership can be spread, and it can be considered either a candle or a mirror. You either inspire or you reflect, and then you help inspire others. I thought, what a novel way to put it. And that phrase resonates with me. And there is a lot to leadership that is about inspiration when you're starting out, but then as you get more senior and more mature in your leadership style, that's about the reflection. So I want to start today's discussion with the leader who's very important to me, my mother. First slide. My mother grew up in World War II in England. Pretty tough time. And as part of growing up as a child in England, she was enlisted into the Home Guard. Her job would be to do things like help lift the rifle up to the men who they thought would have to protect the houses in case the Germans invaded. And so they were also taught how to survive out in the woods in case they were ever invaded. And as she grew up, the outdoors and being a successful woodsman was very important to her. She became a Girl Guide. The war's over, but then for the rest of her life, the challenges of the outdoors just became a part of who she was. And as we grew up in this country, she and my father, my mother was normally the Girl Scout leader or the Boy Scout leader, and our life revolved around camping outdoors and being successful scouts. So one of the things my mother had was using the challenges of the outdoors. But she sort of had this quirk. In her mind, you were not going to be a successful outdoorsman or a woodsman unless you could start a fire with a single match. And so as we grew up in the family and we would go on these outings, we were taught how to gather tinder and kindling and build a perfect fire. And she would show us how to light the fire with a single match. And she would say things like, no cheating, no doing the Boy Scout thing and putting paper in there. If you're ever stuck in the woods, you might not have paper around. And as I grew older, I realized a lot of this intensity about starting this fire with the one match had to do with how she grew up. And the thought that maybe at some point as a child she might have had to live in the woods. And every match would count because they might not be able to get more. And then as we grew older, the one match fire became a test. And she felt that on any given day when we were in the woods as kids, she ought to be able to say, tonight's the night. I'm going to give you one match. You're going to put your fire together, and you're going to start the fire. And being who she is, she would let us know there'd be consequences if we didn't pass the test. If we didn't start the fire, that night, there'd be no campfire. There'd be no singing around the campfire. There'd be no hot meal that night because we wouldn't have a fire. And most egregious of all to us as kids, that meant there'd be no s'mores. So we all knew at some point we were going to be tested by Mom. When we were stationed, my dad was Air Force, we were stationed in Alaska, and we would go every summer to Mount McKinley National Park. There were 4 of us, boy, girl, boy, girl. I was the second. My sister was the youngest, and she was all of 8 years old. We had a day of hiking. It was wet. We were excited. We were happy. We're coming into the camp, looking forward to this fire. And all of a sudden, and to this day, my mother still cannot explain to me what wild hair crept into her. She turned to my younger sister and said, "Tonight's your night. Start the fire with 1 match." Now, my brothers and I, we were in shock. We were just, this is not fair. This is not right. Oh, my God. She's 8 years old. And my mother's like, just looking at us like most of you have had a parent look at you. So we knew civil disobedience was not a method. We were going to have to help my sister light this fire, or we were going to suffer. And so it's still raining. We help her gather her kindling and tinder. My older brother sacrifices his poncho. And my younger brother and I, we've got it as close to the ground with all the material underneath. And then my younger sister, and all of 8 years old, with her single match, slings underneath this poncho, slides underneath. And I mean, this could have been a great Field and Stream story. And literally, we're all there praying, and she strikes her match, and the fire lights. And it was like, glory be to God. We were so excited. We're jumping up and down. We're pounding my sister on the back. We were all so happy. We were successful. And then as years went by, I realized there was a lot more to that 1 match fire. That has to do with leadership. That one thing I learned, that when you have success as an individual, there can be great satisfaction. But when you have success as a team, there can be even greater satisfaction. My mother taught us that you can use challenge to form your team. But there were other things I figured out from the 1 match fire. One, my mother, the leader, the Girl Scout leader, had told us what the standard was. 1 match, get the fire going. But she'd also trained us all along how to get the 1 match fire going. So she'd set the standards, she trained us, and then when the time of challenge came, we knew if we didn't meet that standard, there'd be consequences. And so she was teaching us accountability. And it's interesting. For the rest of my life and career, leadership is often distilled into those simple elements: setting standards, training people, holding them accountable when they fail. But there's another piece. Deep down as kids, we knew my mother was our safety net. She would never let us fail, truly fail and starve to death. And so there's another part of leadership that's about being the safety net. So when your people stumble, you're there to help pick them up and lead them, help them be the successful individuals they're destined to be. That match, that's inspiration for me. But we find as we grow up, sometimes our family stories are not significant for inspiration, and we're very fortunate. We serve in a place and a time when there's plenty of inspiration around us, and I think that's why you're here today. Next slide. One of my first tours in the Beltway, I heard about the Four Chaplains, and I found it just a magnificent story of courage that has stayed with me. So at the start of World War II, there were 4 different men of faith who joined the Army. I just want to focus on one of them, George Fox, because George Fox was a veteran from World War I. He, in World War I, lied about his age and got into the Marine Corps at 18. And then he went to France, and he ended up becoming a medic. And then while on the battlefield, several of his men, as he would refer to them, because he was a doc, a medic, they were under gas attack. He didn't have a gas mask himself, but he went in and rescued all of these people and made sure that they lived. And for that, he received the Silver Star. When World War II started, he turned to his wife and said, I need to be there. I know what the guys need, and I'm the one to do it. And he, like these other chaplains, Rabbi Good from New York, others from Ohio, they all had a great life story, either growing up poor, the son of immigrants, or working through religious bias. And they all meet up on the ship, the USS Dorchester. The Dorchester is a convoy ship bringing troops over to Europe. It had about 900 people on board. It's February of 1943. They know German U-boats are about, and they're just praying their way across the ocean that they get to the far side safely. 150 miles out from the United Kingdom, the Dorchester got struck by a torpedo, and they had to abandon ship. It's freezing cold. People hadn't necessarily slept in their uniforms. The soldiers start rushing up to the deck, and the chaplains realize it's chaos, and they start organizing people, helping them into lifeboats. There's not enough lifeboats. There's not enough life jackets, and the chaplains give away their life jackets. One of the soldiers realizes he doesn't have his gloves. He starts to run back into the ship, and Rabbi Good stops him, convinces him he has spare gloves, and makes the soldier take his gloves. And then as the ship sinks, within minutes, they realize there's not enough jackets and life rafts. And so the chaplains link arms. They give away everything they have, including their spaces in the lifeboats. And they link arms, and they say prayers, and they calm the soldiers until the ship goes down. So those four chaplains, who had a shared sense of courage and taking care of their soldiers, gave their lives. Only about 200 soldiers survived that sinking. But arguably even those 200 wouldn't have lasted if it hadn't been for the courage of those four chaplains. And so we have this great heritage before us that's inspirational. When you think about, when do I need to be courageous? What will I do when my time comes? So there's always history that helps us. But there's more than that. Next slide. This is Specialist Monica Lynn Brown. She's a medic with the Army, and she was serving in Afghanistan in 2007. Her team and they were in a convoy heading out. When they took enemy fire, she was in the first truck, and she says what we recall is the vehicle behind us got hit, and then we recall the tires flying by us on the first truck. And then we saw the soldiers coming out of the truck behind us that got hit, and we knew they were seriously hit. She goes, my platoon sergeant said, let's go, Doc. And so she goes, we came out of our truck and ran to the truck behind us that had been hit, and I just started doing what I was trained to do. Take care of these soldiers. Another soldier said it was unbelievable how she performed. They were under attack from insurgents, and the bullets were missing her by inches as she went about saving the lives of two very life-threatening wounded soldiers. Then they realized they couldn't stay where they were, and some of the less wounded soldiers put down covering fire while Monica and the platoon sergeant moved people off to an area where they were just a little bit safer. She says, at that point, I thought we were going to be okay, and then the mortar rounds started to come in. And so for 2 hours, she kept those soldiers alive until it was all over, The helicopters came and they defeated the insurgents. One of the soldiers after that tour said, you know, I served with a lot of medics, but Monica Lynn's the one I trusted most. 2007, Monica Lynn was 19 years old. And that's something else to think about when you look at the reflection of leadership. Very soon, many of you are going to go out and you're going to lead specialists like Monica Lynn. You're going to lead someone who's received a Silver Star. And literally, you are going to be inspired by them as much as you're inspired by history. Next slide. But there's sometimes in your life where there's not even someone right there in front of you. A few months ago, I got to talk on the phone to Rear Admiral Itunu Hutunu of the Nigerian Navy. She came into the Nigerian Navy several decades ago. She actually wanted to go into the Nigerian Army, but they didn't accept women at the time. She had a degree in architect, so she went to the Navy and said, I'd like to join the Navy. And they said, well, we could use you as a logistician. You have an engineering background. So she stayed, and then she realized as she was becoming and moving up in the ranks, doing logistics for the Nigerian Navy, she was the only woman who was at that level. And then she told me when she was a commander and she was feeling isolated and lonely, she got on the internet and started to look for other women engineers. And she came across articles on Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. Rear Admiral Grace Hopper graduated from Yale in the 1930s. She's the first woman to get a doctorate in mathematics from Yale. When the World War II started, she wanted to join. She had to get an age waiver. She was 37 and a weight waiver. She was 105 pounds. And the Navy let her in to our benefit and to the nation's benefit. We put her in the start of what would later on become computers. And she helped develop and laid the foundation for the language like COBOL and helped develop the first engineering machines that led to computers. And she stayed in this field even after World War II and is considered really the mother of computer science and computer engineering. In the 1960s, she was even named the Computer Science Man of the Year. But Itunu reads about Grace Hopper on the internet, and she is so amazed that this woman could have done so much, not just for America, but for internationally in engineering. She cut out her picture and put it on her corkboard and kept it up for the rest of her career to think about, there's someone who's gone before me. And so then eventually she became the first one-star women admiral in her Navy and the first two-star women admiral in the Navy. And so even though there's times where there might not be that inspiration next to you, there's inspiration out there if you just go looking for it. Next slide. But really, from this time on, it's about the leadership journey you're on. I had this great high school teacher, Chuck Woodward, who I've kept in touch with. And about 10 years ago, we were talking about life and leadership, community. And he said, you know what? The real challenge is people go through life like it's a train. They're all worried about the destination, and the destination might be graduation from college. It might be marriage. It might be that next promotion. And he said, you get so focused on the destination. When you get there, it's not satisfying. He said, the journey is not about the destination. The journey is about the other passengers on the train. And that you have to take time to learn about the other passengers. And so some of you will be lucky. You'll have other passengers who are equivalent to Specialist Monica Lynn. You'll meet passengers, fellow passengers today. And I would tell you, you get to know them, stay connected. That is the richness of the journey, not the destination, but the people you meet along the way and what you learn from each other. Next slide. Now, some of you are going to go, that's not a passenger I'd like to meet. Some of you are going, that's a passenger I've met before. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what is likely to happen in all of your lives. Nassim Taleb wrote the book, The Black Swan, a few years ago. And he talks about the mathematics of life and circumstances. And then he talks about we are destined to be surprised in our lives. It's just going to happen. And what he does is he uses the Thanksgiving turkey as his metaphor. He says, think about it. Thanksgiving turkey has this supreme life. He's raised. He gets up every morning, sun comes up. Check, farmer comes out. He gets fed. He gets water, strolls around the barnyard, gets fed again, goes to bed. Life is good. That happens 365 days. And then the day before Thanksgiving, the farmer grabs him and chops his head off. Whoa, surprise. And the point Nassim Taleb's trying to make is there's no way the turkey knew what was going on in the farmer's mind. He was destined to be surprised. And all the metrics in the world wouldn't have helped the turkey. The turkey, everything was going like clockwork. Sun coming up, getting fed, farmer showing up, water, food, sun goes down, sleep. There's nothing that would have happened that was an indicator that his life was going to turn out differently. So at some point in your life, you will be surprised. Whether you're in the Pentagon and you get unexpected visitors in the form of a plane, or whether you're out at sea and you think a mission like piracy, which had gone away about 180 years ago, comes back. You will get surprised. And I will tell you, it's those passengers on the train, it's that inspiration when you're in that moment of controversy or conflict that will allow you to be the leader that you want to be. Next slide. And so there's a lot in this metaphor of light, candles, and reflection. And I will tell you, years ago when I first started to tell this family story about the one-match fire, I let my mother know that I was going to do it. And being a mom, the first thing she said was, well, your brother tells the story better. But then she gave me another gift. She gave me another leadership lesson. She said, Michelle, think about it. In all the time that each of you had to start your one-match fire, did you ever fail? Any of you? And I said, no. She said, the secret of being a good leader is not that you challenge your people, but you know when to challenge your people and help them, give them a challenge at the time that they're going to be successful. And I thought, wow, pretty lucky to have been raised by such a wise woman. But it's true. You are going to be the inspiration for your people. And you're going to set challenges for them. You're going to make sure they're successful. And at times when it's really dark, you just need to remember, it's never so dark that the light from the smallest candle can't dispel it. And that will be you. All right. Well, thank you for your attention this morning, and I think I have time for a few questions.
Right up to you.
All right. Good morning.
The glass ceiling and how women have, how they've really improved their lifestyle upon, especially in the military. And as someone who's gone through accomplished so much, been such a trailblazer, do you honestly think that there is such a glass ceiling that still exists today?
All right. Well, first of all, would you like a good baseball game? Pass this up like it's a hot dog? Give that to her. So I always say, first of all, the core values for Navy and Marine Corps are courage, honor, and commitment. And I think it takes a certain amount of courage to be the first person to ask a question. So thank you for exhibiting small courage.
Thank you, ma'am.
And then let me answer your question. And some of it in this country has to do with the law. And so I talked a little bit about World War II, and there were many women who served in World War II. The Waves, the WACs, SPARs. Coming out of World War II, we passed a law. Women could serve on active duty for the first time, but they could only be 2% of the active force. They were capped at the percentage, and no woman would be allowed to have the rank of admiral or general in the military. That law did not change till 1967. And so there literally was, by law, a ceiling on women in the military. 1972, the all-volunteer force comes around, and then in the 1970s, the Navy starts allowing women to serve on support ships. So women could start serving at sea in the same roles that men could serve. And then for the Air Force and the Navy, the biggest change was the repeal of the combat exclusion law in the 90s. So up until 1994, women could not fly combat aircraft, and women could not serve in combatant ships. With the repeal of that law, that laid the playing field even, and that allowed opportunities for women like me to serve at sea and serve in the same sorts of roles that men had been serving in. So for the Navy, since that time that law has been repealed, we've had dozens of women command destroyers. We've had a women carrier strike group. The head of the Seabee Corps just retired this week, 2-star women admiral. And so women in the Navy have now been serving just in every field, from surface ships to submarines to aircraft carriers. The only area that's still closed to us is Special Forces, just as it is for all of the services. But the odd thing that happened, I think, with that law is it opened up opportunity in 2 services, Navy and Air Force. But it still had caveats that women could not serve in direct ground combat or be co-located with direct ground combat troops. What that meant was, it didn't mean you weren't going into combat, it just meant you couldn't be co-located with the frontline troops. And then what has happened is, over the last 15 years, the battlefield has been so different with COIN. We have had women co-located with direct ground combat troops. So that's the part we're going through now for the women who serve in the mostly in the Marine Corps and the Army. Are we going to change that caveat, that part of the policy? But I would tell you, once the law changed and it opened up opportunity, and once the law allowed women to be admirals and generals, then the opportunity was there.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yep.
Question over here.
Morning, ma'am. Mr. Third Class Betchel, United States Naval Academy. You talked about Admiral Hopper as a historical role model for the Nigerian admiral. Can I ask you to give us one of your historical role models?
Yes. So after I came on active duty, I was a lieutenant commander, and I got to meet at a luncheon CNO Zumwalt. He was the CNO back in the 70s. He was the youngest CNO the Navy ever had, 47 years old. Went from 3-star to CNO. And he came into the Navy at a time when there was a lot of racial strife. He came in, and shortly after he became CNO, we literally had sit-ins on the aircraft carriers by African American sailors. And it was because they were being treated differently. And then as CNO, he realized that was wrong. And he realized he had to change his Navy. So it took courage and persistence. But he said, you know what? When you come into the Navy, you're a sailor. And you will be treated as a sailor, and everybody will be treated the same. And that sounds so simple and almost sort of crazy when you think about contexture and opportunity. But it had to be said, and it had to be done. So he started to change policies to make sure that people were treated the same. And it was phenomenal leadership at a time of big social change in the country and an understanding that we're all American citizens. And so meeting him and getting to talk to him was just has remained with me the rest of my life. And so occasionally we do get to meet a hero. And then, like most folks, there's other folks I've read about and dreamed about, like the Buffalo Soldiers, that I find pretty inspirational. Thank you for the question. She just said I was amazing. I'm going to give you a coin for that. Okay, no more bribe coins.
Questions?
Nope, you're done? Culminated? One right here? Great. Oh, morning.
Hold on. Good morning, ma'am. Midshipman First Class Cabarly, or Diane Cabarly from the United States Naval Academy. You talked about your experience as far as lighting the fire with a single match growing up and how that's led you through your life. But in your career, what was your biggest accomplishment or struggle that you faced with leadership as far as working with your peers or just being involved in a generation that's shifting so much from going from a gender-biased society where a lot of the stigma with the military is all males, and now we're going to 50-50 females and males?
Okay. It was actually my second ship. I was an engineer. The ship had women officers and enlisted on it for a while. It was the training carrier, so this was before the combat exclusion law was repealed. But women had only been serving, even on the support ships, maybe for about eight to 9 years at that point. We get a new CO, and I start hearing rumblings from my roommates and my shipmates that he doesn't like women. And I've got my head down. You know, I'm pretty much living in a plant, standing rotation watches, and so I have very little action with the CO. He's a captain, and I'm a JG. And you know, to me, my big boss was the chief engineer. And literally, a couple of months after the new CO came on board, some of the other women officers, a couple of whom were senior to me, came in and said, hey, it's kind of coming to a head how we think the captain's biased against women. And I said, okay, I haven't seen anything. And then they go, yeah, but we think somebody ought to go talk to him about it, and we have voted that you go do that. I went, what? And they go, yeah. And I go, really? And then one of them goes, well, you're the senior unrestricted line women on board, and we're like JAGs and meteorologists. I go, really? I said, okay, fair enough. I will ask the enlisted women, and I'll ask you guys to share with me some of the stories of why you think, what you're seeing, and why you think he's prejudiced against women. And then I thought about it, you know, and I was absolutely nervous. I'm a JG on a ship with several hundred officers. I don't even know if the captain knows who I am. And I'm about to go in and tell somebody, we think you're, you know, discriminatory. And then I thought about it and said, you know, first of all, my peers came to me and trusted me with this mission. But second of all, if I can never get the courage to tell what I believe the truth is to leadership, then I probably ought to just leave the service. How will I ever get the courage to lead people in battle if I can't even do this? So I thought about it. I made an appointment, put on my best set of clean khakis, and I went up and I talked to the CO about what the stories were the women had given me and their perspective, because I personally had not seen anything. And he listened. And so one of the leadership lessons I took out of that, because here's this captain with eagles, he's listening to me, was that leaders have to listen. You have to listen. And then he said, you know what, Lieutenant, I don't know if I agree, but I'll tell you what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to have an equal opportunity survey team come out here, and we'll just survey the whole crew so we understand if everybody's feeling this way. And then we'll hold training, and I promised to sit in on the training with everybody else. And he did. He did. So he didn't just discard what I brought to him. He said, okay, I'm willing to explore it. And then It all went away. And so he taught me another valuable lesson, that if your people come to you and they're saying things, that you're obligated as a leader to look into it and find out the ground truth. So it was a great journey in many ways, and probably helped get me to a point of fulfilling that core value of courage for myself. Thanks.
One up here.
Yep. Time for one more? Okay. How about we let both of you ask the question, and then ask your questions, and then I'll try and answer them both, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sounds good. Thank you, ma'am. Good morning. Midshipman Second Class Onus Struck from Miami University. I was wondering if you could tell us about the hardest decision you've ever had to make and how you dealt with it.
Okay.
Good morning, ma'am. Cadet McDonald, Virginia Tech, Army ROTC. You talked about surprises and how we will all experience them. And I was wondering how you would best suggest or how we can prepare for them, even though they aren't expected.
Okay. Those are two great questions, which I'll try and wrap up in one good sea story. So, 2009, I took over the counter-piracy task force, and 4 days into the job, Captain Phillips was kidnapped. So here's the surprise. We knew that people could be kidnapped at sea. That had happened in the 70s with the Achilles Laurel. And so all of the militaries of the world had different special forces or Ministry of Interior type folks who were trained to manage hostage rescue from a cruise ship. That we said, well, if it happened once, it's likely to happen again. And so we have folks who are trained to rescue people from a cruise ship. The surprise is that Captain Phillips wasn't on a cruise ship. He was in a covered life raft. And when you think about the way at sea we board ships, you can either come alongside in small boats and board the ship, climb the rope ladders, or you can come in from a helicopter and slide down a rope and get to a ship that way. This was a covered life raft. There's no coming alongside with boats and taking control of it, and there's clearly no sliding down helicopter ropes and getting control of it. It was now a completely different mission than any of us had ever had the imagination to think of. And then the next thing that was happening was that as we talked to the company, Maersk, Alabama, life rafts are built for survival. They're motor powered. This thing has gas in it. Somali pirates are driving it ashore. And we realized we had hours. We had to get them to stop moving the life raft in order to make time to get special forces out to the situation. Or otherwise, they were going to be ashore in hours. And if Captain Phillips was taken ashore by the pirates, we would probably never get him back. They'd be able to hide him in Somalia. And so then we had to start figuring out, how do we come up with a plan? How do we deal with this surprise? And how do we stop this life raft from getting ashore? And how do we do it in a way that we don't overpressurize the pirates so that they get frustrated and kill Captain Phillips? And so we put together, I said, okay, we're going to have 2 planning teams. And this is, to me, the best way to deal with surprise. I gave them, here's what you have to figure out. And then I deliberately used different people on the teams to get as many different perspectives as I could. So there's a thought out there that it's not a matter of figuring out the good idea, that if you want to get to a good idea, get people together and generate a lot of ideas and then pick the best one. That's the power of diversity. People think differently, and you're going to get a bunch of ideas, and a couple of them are going to be great. And so I set up 2 different planning teams very quickly. And turns out there was a retired FBI agent on board. He was there to help the Marines. We were actually getting ready to send the Marines into Baghdad, and he was there to help them learn about law enforcement. I go, well, this is more like a law enforcement mission. Would you be on one of the planning teams? He said, sure. I had Marines on board. I said, I might need a dose of aggressiveness in the solution. Would you join the teams? They're like, oh, yay, hoorah. I had a woman meteorologist. I said, would you join the team? This is about tides and currents and movement of, we need your expertise. Yes. I had, on the intelligence side, I had a Somali interpreter. He had been born and lived in Somalia. I said, we need somebody who understands how the pirates think. Would you be on one of the planning teams? Absolutely. So I'm mixing these teams up. I had a lawyer who just thought differently. I said, would you be on the team and would you lead one of the teams? He's like, absolutely. This is the way it should be. Lawyers should always be in charge. Okay, whatever. And then I put some enlisted members on the team. And it was interesting. One of them came up to me and said, I don't want to be on the team. I'm uncomfortable. This is not what we do. Officers do planning. We are the executors. We make things happen. And I said, here's the deal. Whatever crazy ideas we come up with, they have got to work. I have hours. And you guys, you're the reality check on the team. Because we could sit here and just come up with all these crazy schemes, and if you sit there at the time they're being birthed and go, that ain't going to happen, here's why. We'll discard it. And so I talked to the two team leaders. One of them was my OPSO, and the lawyer said, go out. Here's the mission. Here's what we got to do. 45 minutes. I'll be back. And at the time, we were doing several different missions because that was just one of the missions we were dealing with. And so I go off and start looking at some other events that are going on and what we're doing about it. And then the teams kind of got together, and they came to me and they said, we think we have a plan. We think we can use water to stop the life raft. I go, really? And they go, yeah. We will have the ships we have out there, we'll have them back off, go by the life raft very quickly, and at high speed create a wake that pushes the raft back. They go, it's non-kinetic, it shouldn't pressurize the pirates, it should make them stop and think. And then we'll get back on the 1MC and start talking to them in Somali and tell them, you know, please stop what you're doing. And the enlisted guys came up with, well, we also ought to try using fire hoses to push the life raft back. That's a good idea. And so that's what we did. It was getting to be dark. The ships backed away. First one came by, had sort of like a jet ski maneuver and pushed this wave up on the life raft. We almost swamped it. The door was open. But they stopped. They stopped moving. And they said, hey, what's going on? What happened? And we sat there for a while. They started to motor up again, and then we tried fire hoses, and then they finally stopped. And so we got them to stop. And they didn't hurt Captain Phillips. And that was the first step for the rest of the rescue mission. So using the power of the people and the diversity teams, that's generally, if you've already got that team there, that's how you get through a surprise. You know, I've had the privilege of leading sailors and Marines for 33 years now, and they make miracles happen every day. And that's worth serving. That's why it's worth serving. So thank you very much for your time today. See you around the fleet.